I still remember when you came in.
Yep.
And it's still to this day, I tell people, my favorite demo lesson of all time. You come in and you colonize the classroom.
Yep.
And students are just doing it. You know, they're like, okay, I guess you're gonna take our books away. I guess you're gonna take our backpacks. You're gonna take our seats now. And then you're like, well, I just taught you about colonialism. Welcome to the Whole Student Podcast with Cal Balivant. Whole Student refers to the magical moment when a student is fully seen, heard, and known. This is the spark of a relationship between student and teacher, where the former is catalyzed on a journey beyond what they thought possible, and the latter is a proud advisor cheering from the sidelines. The Whole Student Podcast asks guests to reflect back to their moment, to the person who became a transformative teacher in their lives, and on the journey they were set upon. Our guest today is Mark Lukacs. Mark is a gifted educator and author of the internationally best-selling book, My Lovely Wife in the Psych Ward. He's currently the 9th grade dean at the Bay Area Independent School, where he also teaches history. His book is a heart-wrenching yet hopeful memoir of a young marriage that is redefined by mental illness and affirms the power of love. It is my great pleasure to welcome my brother, Mark, to the Whole Student Podcast. Mark?
Cal, it's so good to be here.
Thanks for being here, brother.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate being here.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start you off with the first question, which is taking you back, taking everyone back on a journey when you were a student. What words would you use to describe yourself when you were a student?
Well, I think probably the best word is a word that was never labeled with me when I was a student, but that is ADHD. Because I was jumping out of my seat constantly, super eager to always be volunteering information. I never fully was diagnosed, but I am pretty certain that I have a lot of energy. I need to be moving. And I mean, the reason I've continued as an educator is because I love school. I love being in school since I was a kid up until today when I still go to school every day. Wow.
Was there a moment when you were a student that you felt seen or heard or truly known?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really fortunate that I went to some pretty incredible schools. The greatest school that I went to, the one that sort of became the hallmark for our family. When I was in second grade, we moved to Tokyo, Japan.
Wow.
And we went to an international school there. And before this, I had been in big public schools, good public schools, but big, easier to sort of like get lost in the crowd. And at this school, my second grade teacher, Miss Matthews, was really dialed into us, made us feel like the learning was ours. And I think that was really pivotal to me truly falling in love with the educational institution and wanting to be there more, you know? So that to me was probably the first moment, but I also feel fortunate that I feel like I had a lot of great teachers along the way. And I feel, I'm a loud person. I kind of made sure my voice was heard. And so I feel like I was fortunate to come across a lot of teachers who nurtured that.
Was Miss Matthews that person for you? Or is there another teacher that rises to the surface as that transformative teacher, the one that you really connected with, the one that helped put you on your journey?
It's so hard to say because I would say that's my elementary school version. I'd say my high school version is a yin and a yang of two people. Both in 9th grade. One was my bio teacher, who was the most terrifying human being I've ever met in school. And everyone was scared of her. And I worshiped her. I thought she was amazing. She really held a firm line and I needed that. And then the other was my English teacher, who was the real soft, touchy-feely kind of guy, super flexible. And so having both of those in different disciplines, I feel like I really appreciated those two styles of teaching and nurturing. And so in my mind, you kind of like put them together, and those are the two collective teachers who really changed the game for me.
And what are the names?
Mrs. Pomeroy was my bio teacher, and Mr. Consiglio, Mr. C, was the lit teacher.
Fair enough. Are you staying in touch with them?
You know, so Mrs. Pomeroy, I'm from Delaware. That's where I grew up. That's where I went to high school. And I go to this little beach town in the summers. I've been doing that my whole life. And Mrs. Pomeroy also goes to the same beach town. And as it turns out, we used to go sit on the beach about 200 yards apart. My family would be there and her family would be closed down.
Is that because she's still terrified?
No. Well, the funny thing is I would see her, and in the summer she'd be all friendly. And then we go back to school and like sort of pretend we didn't have that off-campus interaction. It was all business at school. But to be honest, no, I haven't otherwise kept in touch with them because my family moved away from Delaware. Wow. And unfortunately, I haven't had a ton of connection there.
Well, if you could talk to them now, I hope they listen to this podcast. What would you tell Ms. Pomeroy and
Mr. Consiglio? I first obviously would say thank you, right? Yeah. Like they instilled in me. I feel like I still remember like how mitochondrial cells work.
Oh my God.
Because of something I learned 20 plus years ago, right?
Wow.
Because it was, you had to know it.
You had to know it.
And so even just like appreciation of mastery, but also that's from Mrs. Pomeroy. And then from Mr. C, I'd say appreciation of everyone's unique learning path. I'd say that as a teacher myself, I tend to be more like Mr. Consiglio.
Right.
I tend to really individualize the learning experience for students, try to meet them more where they are.
Right.
And probably I'm maybe too permissive sometimes, just like he was probably a little too permissive sometimes too.
Sure.
But to both of them, it's like a major thank you. You know?
Yeah. Oh, wow. So you're a ninth grade dean now. You're teaching in ninth grade.
Yep.
Do you channel some of their teachings?
I think so. I think what I learned from Mrs. Pomeroy is that boundaries are important and firmness is important.
Yeah.
And kids are trying to figure out what's right, what's wrong, what they should and shouldn't do.
Okay.
And I think to have a clear line drawn can be really helpful. And Mrs. Pomeroy was clear about drawing those lines. And so when I'm in my ninth grade dean role and having more maybe student behavior, disciplinary issues that I need to deal with, I feel like she's empowered me to be more confident drawing a line
Got it.
and saying this is good for students to have a clear vision of this we do and this we don't do.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. So that's probably how I channel her.
Well, you wear multiple hats and
I do. Yeah.
You're a phenomenal writer.
Thank you.
And someone put you on that path too.
Yeah.
So who was that person?
Okay. Great question. Yeah. So this was my 10th grade teacher, Mr. Jordan.
Okay.
And he was the first one to ever give me a C. He's actually the only C I've ever been.
Oh my God.
And it was my first writing assignment.
Hold on. Did you get a late paper?
No, it was just not good. According to him, it just wasn't that good.
Wow.
And it really challenged me. And I was like, what's wrong about it? I need to make this better.
Okay.
And I think that was the first time where I learned I can write not just to a formula.
Right.
But within the parameters of a formula, like an analytical essay, still be quite personal, And so then when I got to college, I would often write these, I was a history major, lit minor. I was writing papers all the time. And I sort of channeled what I learned from Mr. Jordan. And I would write these really long footnotes that were mostly just like inside conversations between me and the professor.
Wow.
And I don't know if they ever read them, but it was kind of my chance to instill a little creativity into research type writing.
I see.
And I think it was there that I found I kind of like this. I kind of like writing. It's a good way for me to get my feelings out and to process the world as it's unfolding around me.
Now, do students do that now? Do they are you Mr. Jordan to them?
I don't know. I mean, I used to teach history. I've actually, in the last 2 years, shifted to I teach like a health and wellness and social justice class. Yeah. And so we don't do as much writing. Yeah. But when I taught history, I could still tell you probably today, students who have, maybe they wrote their ninth grade history paper 6 years ago. I could look at the student, I could tell them what they wrote their paper about because I was so invested in what the writing process was for them.
Right.
Because I really do feel like the ability to write and write clearly and write well is such a powerful tool.
Right.
I mean, we communicate so much through writing.
That's right.
All the time.
That's right.
And so we need to be able to write professionally, informally, but most of all, authentically.
What was Mr. Jordan's reaction to your book?
I don't know, actually. So my school found out that my book was out. And they did a magazine article about me, like in their school magazine. Yeah. And that was really cool because I heard from some other teachers that were more on the periphery of my experience. Right. But Mr. Jordan, he was a long time teacher at this school. He retired. And so I didn't hear directly from him. Got it. But I did mention him in that interview, how like that experience really was for me a wake-up call about I need to become a better writer because I want to be able to communicate in this way.
Wow. Mark.
Yeah. Now, I also have to say, I've left out an important category of teachers.
Fair.
Okay. And I know I could say this to you.
Yeah.
Religious teachers for me.
Yeah.
I went to a Catholic high school and there were priests on campus. And I had an incredibly close relationship with a priest who ended up being the guy who he facilitated my wife and I met him, our wedding. And I'd say he was, although I only had him for one semester teaching me government, he was the biggest influence in terms of shaping me as like a whole child. Wow. Right. And knowing that this is the whole student.
Yes, whole student.
I feel like it was an amazing relationship that happened almost entirely outside the classroom. Right.
That's amazing work.
Yeah.
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 Well, question I have is, I always ask my guests at the end about the 5 people they would put together in a dinner table, 5 teachers in their lives. And I feel like you've touched on 5 teachers here. What's that dinner looking like? Who's your guest? Like, let's finalize that list.
Okay. Well, so I'm definitely going to say Father Collins. Unfortunately, he's passed away, but I would love to be able to bring him back to the table. Right. Ms. Matthews, my teacher in 2nd grade.
Yeah.
I'm gonna cheat on you a little bit.
Okay. Oh.
I'm gonna say Pomeroy Consiglio for sure.
Okay.
And then the 5th, I'm bringing you to the table.
Oh, what?
Because what people may not know is that we worked together for 8 years.
Right, we did.
And I have never worked with someone who I so clearly identify as a teacher for me.
Come on, man.
And no, I'm serious, Callian. What you've taught me about the concept of inclusion, how to be an empathetic, culturally competent person. I feel like I learned more working with you at Athenian than I have with any other professional colleague. And I mean that sincerely.
Wow.
And so I hope you don't mind. I'm doing this on a recorded podcast.
Yeah, on a recorded podcast.
I wanted to throw you for a curveball a little bit here.
You got me.
But I have to say, like, usually when we think of our teachers, we think of when we're the ones in the chairs in the classroom.
Wow.
But I was still, even in the role at the front of the classroom, felt like I learned so much from you.
Yeah, I'm humbled by that.
And I think it would be really cool to have you at dinner with some of the people who saw me as a little ADHD 2nd grader.
Oh my God, man. I'm humbled by that.
Yeah, for sure, man. But I mean that in all sincerity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I still remember when you came in.
Yep.
And it's still to this day, I tell people my favorite demo lesson of all time. You come in and you colonize the classroom.
Yep.
And students are just doing it. You know, they're like, okay, I guess you're going to take our books away. I guess you're going to take our backpacks. You're going to take our seats now. And then you're like, well, I just taught you about colonialism. and you know, talk about experiential lesson that lands, and talk about a risk. Yeah. And taking a risk. But students that were like, I would have characterized as jumping off the walls, that couldn't keep their attention. They were on you.
But you know what I'll never forget is later in that day, us sitting outside House 9 classroom.
That's right.
And you were talking about how with your name, people ask you, who are you? What are you?
Right.
And I was just so excited and immediately challenged at the idea that even before being hired, even as part of my hiring process, we were going to start pushing around identity. What identity means, how do we identify ourselves and each other? Wow. And so even in that first interaction, that's where I was like, this is a guy I'm going to learn from. Wow. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I remember those days fondly, vividly. And I know that phase, that portion of your life is in that book.
Oh, totally.
Right. And it's like, and I remember the days that you were overwhelmed. I remember
it was hitting hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And coming out from under it. And we've talked about this a little bit, but your book is the perfect metaphor for the time we live in, brother.
I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to talking about that tonight.
Yeah.
I feel like 12 years ago when Julia got sick, the conversations around self-care were very quiet and on the sort of hidden in the closet. And thankfully, I feel like there's a lot more around that.
Yeah. Big time.
And so I'm glad that I can be another voice encouraging people to take care of themselves as they face their own traumas in their lives and lean on the people who they love to get through them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I appreciate you.
Me too, Callian. It's so good to be here.
Well, thanks for being on the podcast. I know that you've said a lot that's going to inspire people. And my hope is that people start to connect with their former teachers.
I hope so too.
Teachers feel emboldened to feel like, I can form these relationships with students and to catalyze the learner.
Cool.
On the journey. So awesome. I appreciate you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you. Well, you've been our guest today for the Whole Student Podcast. Thank you for your story and for your inspiration, Mark. And my hope is that you'll feel inspired. Go ahead and find this podcast and wherever you find your podcast and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Appreciate all of you. Class dismissed. The Whole Student Podcast has been brought to you by Duncast. Produced by J.D. Scroggin, the Director of Marketing and Communication at the Dunn School, and co-produced by Brandon Scott of Comfort Food. Thank you for joining us.